The whispering wind. The wind, a ravenous beast, gnawed at the cabin, its icy breath finding every seam. Fine snow, like ground quartz, infiltrated the interior, dusting surfaces with a spectral sheen. Alara burrowed deeper beneath thin blankets, the fire a feeble bulwark against the blizzard's onslaught. 3 days it had raged, a continuous whiteout punctuated by the wind's ferocious cries, obscuring everything. Pressing close to the frosted pane offered no solace, only a dizzying ballet of snow, a featureless expanse blurring the horizon. Her refuge had become a fragile shell buffeted by a tempestuous sea. Each violent gust threatened to tear it free, casting it adrift in the frozen wastes. Sunlight was a forgotten memory. Time dissolved into the dwindling woodpile and the insistent pangs of hunger. Each meager meal, a scattering of dried berries, a sliver of jerky, was a calculated risk, a postponement of the inevitable. The thought sent an even deeper chill through her than the icy tendrils that snaked through the room. Thomas was a constant ache in her heart. His sturdy embrace, the warmth of his smile, his knack for finding humor amidst hardship. Spring's cruel hand had stolen him, leaving her to face Dakota's brutal winter alone. He rested beneath the old oak at the property's edge, a lonely sentinel in the desolate landscape, now buried beneath a thick shroud of snow. Alara's cough, a rasping echo in the close confines, rattled her chest. A dull throb pulsed in her head. She feared illness, a deadly adversary in her current state. Without remedy, without care, she was utterly isolated. With aching limbs, she forced herself upright. The animals needed tending, though their fate mirrored her own. Hens huddled in the adjacent shed, the cow sheltered within a crude lean-to. Yet, even under rudimentary shelter, they suffered. Donning her heavy coat and swathing her face in a woolen scarf, she wrestled the door open. The gale slammed into her, stealing her breath and stinging her skin. Waist-deep snow impeded every step as she fought her way to the coop. The hens, a huddled mass of ruffled feathers and listless eyes, barely registered her arrival, their energy spent on mere survival. She scattered feed, which they barely touched. Their demise felt imminent if the storm persisted. Next, she plowed towards the lean-to where Bess, the cow, stood shivering, her breath pluming in the frozen air. A weak moo greeted Alara's approach. She stroked Bess's flank, offering silent comfort. She'd managed to milk Bess yesterday, but today her hands were too numb for the attempt. The return to the cabin was a grueling trial. The wind and snow challenged each stride. Her legs burned, her lungs protested. Gasping for air, she stumbled through the door, her body trembling with exhaustion. Inside, she collapsed onto her bed, seized by shivers. The fire demanded attention, but her strength had abandoned her. As she closed her eyes, hoping to summon some energy, an overwhelming despair washed over her. The wind continued its mournful wail, seeping through the walls. It sounded like a dirge, a lament for lost souls. Alara imagined her own cries carried away by the wind, swallowed by the immense wilderness, lost forever. Thomas's memory returned. His fortitude, his unyielding spirit. He would have known how to endure. But he was gone, and this ordeal was hers alone. As dusk deepened, the tempest intensified. The wind shrieked with renewed vigor, and the snow fell in relentless sheets. The cabin groaned and shuddered, threatening to buckle. Alara lay rigid, listening to the storm, feeling the cold penetrate her very core. She closed her eyes, awaiting whatever the night might bring. The familiar landscape had dissolved. The creek, the copse of trees, the distant hills, all were submerged beneath a uniform white blanket. The world had shrunk to an infinite expanse of wind and snow, a desolate and merciless void. Even the wolves had retreated, their haunting calls silenced. Only the wind dared to challenge the elements, its ceaseless whisper a constant reminder of nature's power. It was a harsh arena where only the strong could hope to prevail. And Alara, weakened by grief and hardship, doubted her own resilience. Accusations and chains. The biting wind clawed at Alara as she stumbled into the relative shelter of Silas Blackwood's general store. The bell above the door, choked with ice, gave a mournful jingle, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the howl outside. Her cheeks stung, painted crimson by the wind, and her fingers, despite the thickest of Thomas's mittens, felt numb. The store, usually a hive of activity, was eerily quiet. A single oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows across shelves packed with dry goods, tools, and fabrics. Silas, a man whose girth seemed to expand with each passing winter, stood behind the counter, polishing it with a rag. His eyes, small and beady, followed Alara with an unsettling intensity. Well, he drawled, his voice a low rumble. Look what the wind blew in. Widow Meadowsweet. Come to see if I'm giving away charity, have you? Elara ignored the barb. I need supplies, Silas. Flour, salt, some lamp oil. And if you have any spare seeds, my stores are running low. She pushed a small pouch of coins salvaged from Thomas's meager savings across the counter. Silas examined the coins, his expression sour. This wouldn't buy you a decent dog, let alone a winter's worth of supplies. He tossed the pouch back at her. You expect me to just hand things over? Times are hard, widow. I'll pay you back in the spring, Elara pleaded, her voice tight. I can work. Anything. Just enough to get through. Silas chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down Elara's spine. Work? What could a frail thing like you do? Besides, everyone knows your farm's practically worthless now. Thomas let it go to seed years ago. He leaned closer, his breath heavy with the smell of stale tobacco. Unless. His eyes gleamed with a predatory light, you have something else to offer. Elara recoiled, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. I just need supplies, Silas. He straightened up, his face hardening. Funny that. I seem to recall seeing you sniffing around that shipment of furs that came in this morning. Valuable goods, those? Very valuable. Elara frowned. I was just looking at them. I've never seen furs that fine. Looking, were you? Or helping yourself? Silas's voice rose, attracting the attention of a couple of men who were huddled near the stove. They turned, their faces etched with curiosity and a hint of suspicion. I didn't take anything. Elara protested, her voice trembling. I swear, Silas. Then you won't mind if I search you, will you? He reached across the counter, his thick fingers closing around her arm. Elara flinched away. Don't touch me. I haven't done anything wrong. Silas's face flushed crimson. Are you refusing a search? That's mighty suspicious, widow. Mighty suspicious indeed. He bellowed, Ezra. Jeb, come over here. The two men lumbered over, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something akin to anticipation. Silas pointed a thick finger at Elara. This woman's been helping herself to my goods. I want her searched. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This is ridiculous. I haven't stolen anything. The men advanced, their eyes cold and assessing. Ezra, a wiry man with a cruel smile, grabbed her arm. Let's see what you're hiding, widow. They searched her roughly, their hands probing her pockets and beneath her cloak. Elara struggled, tears welling in her eyes. Stop it. You have no right. Of course they found nothing. Silas, however, remained unmoved. Maybe she stashed it outside, he declared, his voice dripping with false righteousness. We need to teach her a lesson. A lesson about honesty and respect for property. He nodded to Ezra and Jeb. Take her outside. What? No. Please, Silas, I beg you. Elara cried, her voice cracking. But her pleas were lost in the growing murmur of the small crowd that had gathered. The men dragged her out into the blinding snow. The wind tore at her cloak, and the cold bit through her thin boots. She saw, with growing horror, a thick chain hanging from a gnarled oak tree in the center of the settlement. You can't do this, she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the storm. They forced her against the tree, the rough bark scraping against her skin. Ezra fastened the chain around her wrist, the metal cold and unforgiving against her flesh. He secured it with a heavy padlock. This will teach you, widow, Silas said, his voice carrying clearly through the wind. A day and a night in the cold. Maybe then you'll learn the value of honesty. He looked around at the onlookers, his face a mask of righteous indignation. Let this be a warning to anyone who thinks they can steal from Silas Blackwood. The crowd murmured its approval. Elara, chained to the tree, watched as they dispersed, their faces averted, their silence a deafening condemnation. The last thing she saw, before the snow blurred her vision, was Silas Blackwood retreating into the warmth of his store, a smug look on his face. The wind howled, a mournful symphony of despair. Elara, alone and forgotten, felt the cold seep into her bones. The chain bit into her wrist, a constant reminder of her helplessness. She closed her eyes, and a single tear froze on her cheek. The frozen days. The wind, a serrated blade, scraped across Elara's skin. Each icy breath plundered the dwindling heat trapped beneath her worn shawl. Her extremities pulsed with pain, then succumbed to a deadening chill, a herald of oblivion. Days dissolved into nights, the passage marked solely by the sun's feeble slant through the bare trees. The iron chain chafed at her wrist, a frozen shackle branding her. She summoned memories of emerald meadows in Ireland alive with wildflowers and drone of bees, yet the cold had infiltrated her core, glazing those recollections, leaving only a raw ache where joy had blossomed. Her stomach clenched, an empty echo against the wind's ceaseless lament. Since Blackwood's damning accusation, since the violating search and his triumphant smirk as he'd locked the chain, she hadn't known sustenance. He'd abandoned her to the elements, a public spectacle, but the townspeople looked away, their silence born of shame or dread. Her thoughts scattered like leaves on the wind. She recalled the pact she and Liam had forged to escape Ireland. The potato blight had tightened like a fist, strangling the land. Liam, ever hopeful, had envisioned America as a haven, a realm where diligent labor bore fruit, where families flourished. Imagine, Ilara, he declared, his eyes alight, our own land, enough to eat, a future for the children. Children! The thought unleashed a torrent of fresh sorrow. They had yearned, struggled, for a child, but hunger and adversity had conspired against them. Now Liam was gone, felled by a fever that ravaged the teeming tenements of New York, her dreams interred alongside him. Driven by whispers of rich soil and renewed prospects, she had journeyed west, arriving in this desolate place with naught but the clothes she wore, a handful of mementos from their Irish life, and the unshakable conviction that she could forge a brighter destiny. That conviction now seemed as fragile as spun glass. She willed her fingers to move, to coax back feeling, but they remained stiff and unresponsive. Her parched throat stung. She scraped frost from the tree's bark, the frigid moisture offering scant relief. Another day, or perhaps another night. Time had lost all meaning. Despair, a leaden cloak, stifled her. Would anyone seek her out? Did anyone care? Her mother's tales surfaced, yarns of Irish sprites and ancient enchantments. She dismissed them as childish whims, but now, shivering and isolated, she craved the solace of those fables. A silent invocation, a desperate appeal, crystallized on her frozen lips. The wind screamed, a desolate dirge mirroring the pain within her. She closed her eyes, yielding to the cold, to the despair. Perhaps this was the end. Perhaps her journey culminated here, bound to a tree in a land that had pledged paradise but delivered only heartbreak. Yet, even as her body succumbed to the creeping numbness, a flicker of defiance ignited. A tiny ember of the unyielding spirit that had ferried her across the ocean, that had sustained her through loss and misery. She would not yield. Not yet. She would fight. She would endure. Somehow. A hunter's instinct. Swift Arrow returned to the village as the sun began its slow descent, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of orange and violet. He carried a deer slung across his broad shoulders, its weight a familiar comfort. The air, crisp and biting, held the scent of pine and wood smoke, a welcome change from the metallic tang of blood he'd grown accustomed to during the hunt. Usually, the forest pulsed with life, a symphony of rustling leaves, chattering squirrels, and the distant calls of birds. But today, an unnatural stillness clung to the air, a silence so profound it prickled his skin. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He deposited the deer near the skinning racks, the rhythmic thud of its body on the packed earth drawing the attention of a few women preparing the evening meal. Nods were exchanged, words unnecessary. They knew he always provided. As he walked towards his lodge, a sense of unease settled over him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The earth itself seemed to whisper a warning. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the snow-dusted trees. The setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows, making the forest seem even more menacing. He closed his eyes, focusing on the feeling that gnawed at his gut. It was a primal instinct, honed by generations of his people who lived in harmony with the land. An instinct that had kept them alive through countless harsh winters and unforeseen dangers. He opened his eyes, his decision made. He couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling. It tugged at him, pulling him towards the deeper woods, away from the safety of the village. He adjusted the quiver on his back, ensuring his arrows were within easy reach. His hand instinctively went to the knife at his hip, the smooth bone handle a reassuring presence. He informed no one of his intentions, a solitary figure melting back into the trees. He moved with a quiet grace, his moccasins making barely a sound on the snow-covered ground. He followed the invisible thread of unease, each step taking him further into the silent heart of the forest. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwined, creating a canopy that blotted out the last rays of the setting sun. The temperature dropped noticeably, a frigid kiss on his exposed skin. He pulled his fur cloak tighter around him, his senses on high alert. He scanned the ground, the trees, the air, searching for any sign of what had disturbed the balance of the forest. A broken twig, a faint scent carried on the wind, not the scent of animal or tree, but something else, something human. He stopped, his body coiled like a spring, ready to react at a moment's notice. The scent was faint, almost imperceptible, But it was there. It spoke of distress, of pain, of something terribly wrong. He moved forward again, more cautiously now, his senses straining to decipher the subtle clues the forest offered. The trees seemed to press in on him, their gnarled branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to impede his progress. The silence deepened, broken only by the occasional snap of a frozen branch under his moccasins. Then he saw it. A faint disturbance in the snow, a scuff mark that suggested something had been dragged. His heart quickened. He followed the trail, his pace increasing as the scent grew stronger, the feeling of dread intensifying. The trail led him to a small clearing, bathed in the pale light of the rising moon. And there, chained to a tree, was a woman. Discovery. Against the bruised canvas of twilight, the woman appeared spectral, tethered to the ancient wood. Swift Arrow, silent as falling snow, circled, his movements a wraith-like dance. He'd witnessed brutality aplenty, the hardened visages of warriors, the flinty gaze of merchants. But this transcended mere cruelty. This was a cold-blooded diminishment of life, a spirit already crushed by winter's long fist. He lowered himself, his sharp gaze fixed on the heavy chain biting into her wrist, fastened to a hoary yoke. Rust, like spilled blood, stained the unforgiving iron, a chronicle of her protracted agony. Her garments, once practical, now hung as shredded pennants, offering scant defense against the wind's frigid caress. Dried gore crusted around the chafed skin of her wrist. Her face, smeared with grime and hollowed with suffering, was upturned, a silent supplication to an uncaring sky. Her breath came in ragged gasps, punctuated by shivers that racked her frame. Swift Arrow straightened, his gaze sweeping the perimeter, hunting for signs of the perpetrator. Grooves, deep and presumptuous, scored the earth, heading southward, towards the settlements. Tracks that declared a man drunk on power, unworried about consequence. He knelt once more, drawn by the faintest of sounds, a breathy moan. Life persisted. He extended a toughened hand, pausing a heartbeat before brushing her cheek. Her skin was glacial, the touch of mortality itself. Her eyelids flickered, then, with obvious strain, parted. Eyes, a startling azure, swam with pain and bewilderment. They dilated as they locked on his features, reflecting a volatile mix of terror and disbelief. He murmured in Lakota, weaving words of comfort and calm. He knew language was a barrier, but hoped the cadence, the intent, would resonate. "Fear not. I will aid you." Her lips barely moved, shaping a hushed plea. He leaned in, straining to catch the sound. "Water," she croaked, her voice a parched rattle. Swift Arrow nodded, understanding. Thirst was a sharper tormentor than hunger, of that he was certain. He retrieved his water skin from his supplies, carefully working the stopper loose. He raised it to her chapped lips, metering the flow, allowing her small sips. He watched as droplets traced a path down her chin, darkening the soil on her neck. Her eyes closed, a fleeting moment of grace, the first sign of vitality he'd witnessed. When she'd taken her fill, he lowered the skin. Her gaze reconnected with his, now carrying a fragile ember of gratitude. He examined the chain more closely. It was hefty, forged of dense metal, secured with a robust lock. He could cleave it with his axe, but the reverberation would travel far in the still air, potentially inviting unwanted company. Stealth was paramount. He delved into his pouch, retrieving a small, exquisitely wrought bone implement. A gift from his grandmother, a master bone artisan, intended for fine detail and intricate repair. He doubted its efficacy against the lock itself, but perhaps. He traced the chain's length, searching for vulnerabilities, points of weakness. He located one near the shackle encircling her wrist, a link subtly thinner than its counterparts. A gamble, demanding precise force, but his most promising option. He met her gaze again, offering a silent invocation to the spirits for guidance. He gestured to the chain, then to the bone tool, then back to the chain. He needed her understanding, her stillness. She seemed to comprehend. Her eyes, though still clouded with suffering, now held a pinprick of faith. She nodded an almost imperceptible inclination. Swift Arrow drew a deep breath, fortifying his resolve. He positioned the bone tool against the vulnerable link, carefully aligning it. He drew his knife, placing the flat of the blade against the tool's butt. A final glance at the woman, her face a canvas of hope and anxiety. Then, in one swift, measured strike, he impacted the knife's handle. To the village. The bone tool, honed smooth by countless passes, found purchase in the chain's frigid iron. Swift Arrow, a study in patience, worked with breath that plumed white against the frozen air. Each minute adjustment, each delicate twist, spoke of unwavering control. Elara watched, her own breath shallow and hitching, a bitter metallic taste stinging her mouth. The scrape of bone against metal, a symphony of hope, consumed her focus. Despite the chill, a droplet of sweat traced a path down Swift Arrow's temple. Precision was paramount. Too much force meant failure, or worse, discovery. He risked a glance at Alara, her silent plea reflected in her wide eyes. A barely perceptible nod was his reply. Then the satisfying click as the link yielded. The heavy chain clattered onto the snow. He attacked the remaining shackle, freeing her other wrist. The abraded skin there was raw and weeping, a testament to her ordeal. He examined the angry welts, knowing he'd need something emollient. Without a word, he moved behind her and, with unexpected ease, lifted her into his arms. Alara sucked in a sharp breath, her muscles spasming, reliving Silas's brutality in every fiber. But Swift Arrow's hold, though secure, was gentle, his gaze unwavering. She saw no threat, only quiet purpose. Slowly, the tension bled out of her, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder. The trek back to the village dissolved into a snowy haze. Each footfall, muffled by the drifts, was a steady drumbeat. The wind keened around them, a desolate counterpoint to Alara's inner turmoil. She burrowed into the thick fur of his coat, leaching warmth from his strong frame. Though the cold still gnawed, it was blunted now, tempered by his presence. The phantom scent of wood smoke, a promise on the wind, grew stronger as they pressed on. Alara raised her head, her gaze sweeping the horizon. Through the blizzard's swirling curtain, the clustered cones of teepees materialized, a pocket of refuge in the unforgiving landscape. A welcoming chorus of barks erupted as they neared. Children, cheeks rouged by the frost, peered from the edges of fur-lined doorways. Women, their faces maps of hardship and wisdom, paused in their chores, observing their approach. Swift Arrow carried Alara directly to a teepee distinguished by its size and isolated placement. He eased her down just beyond the entrance. Her legs, and used for what felt like an eternity, threatened to buckle. The teepee flap parted, revealing an elderly woman. Lines etched with time framed long braids of silver. Her eyes, ancient yet sharp, held a profound empathy. Grandmother Willow. She scrutinized Alara, her gaze both assessing and filled with profound gentleness. Then, with a hand gnarled by age, she cupped Alara's cheek. "Welcome home, daughter," she murmured, her voice a soothing balm. "You are safe." Two younger women moved forward, guiding Alara inside. The interior pulsed with warmth, fragrant with wood smoke and healing herbs. A cheerful fire snapped in the center, painting the walls with dancing light. They settled Alara onto a pile of soft furs, their movements tender. One began to tend to her wrists, applying a soothing salve crafted from herbs and rendered fat. The other pressed a cup of warm broth into her hands. Alara sipped it slowly, relishing the heat that unfurled within her. Simple as it was ambrosia. Lying there, cocooned in the quiet compassion of these women, a fragile serenity began to take root. Fear still lingered, weakness persisted, but for the first time in what felt like forever, a spark of hope flickered. She was not alone anymore. Healing and acceptance. The salve Grandmother Willow smoothed over Alara's raw skin carried the crisp scent of pine needles and rich earth. Each tender application, each Lakota word whispered like a prayer, chipped away at the burden weighing on her soul. The lodge fire popped and hissed, a cheerful defiance against the blizzard's lingering breath and the bone-deep chill of her ordeal. Alara's gaze followed the older woman's hands, their weathered texture a testament to years etched in labor and wisdom, moving with an assuredness that needed no explanation. She attempted a smile, but her facial muscles felt foreign. "Thank you," she croaked, her voice rusty from disuse. Grandmother Willow offered only a nod, her eyes, dark wells of ageless understanding, holding Alara's for a beat before returning to her task, loosely swathing Alara's wrists in a supple strip of tanned leather. The boundaries between days blurred. At first, sleep offered little respite, tormented by visions of Silas Blackwood's pitiless visage and the storm's relentless shriek through the branches. But gradually, these nightmares retreated, displaced by the gentle symphony of the village, peals of children's laughter, the steady pulse of mortar against pestle, the comforting cadence of conversations in an unfamiliar tongue. Her waking hours were spent in quiet observation. The Lakota women moved with a practiced efficiency, preparing meals, repairing garments, crafting elaborate beadwork. Their movements flowed with inherent grace, their faces bearing the imprint of resilient inner strength, a quality Alara admired from afar. She was struck by their profound respect for every living thing, the quiet gratitude they offered before taking sustenance from the land. This was a universe removed from the stark, unforgiving reality of her isolated farmstead. Swift Arrow, often away on hunting expeditions, occasionally presented her with small tokens. A smooth, slate-colored stone gleamed from the riverbank, a flawless plume shed from a bird's wing, a cluster of tart berries. He was a man of few words, but his gaze held a reassuring warmth. She sensed beneath his stoicism a deep undercurrent of sorrow. One evening, as the setting sun painted the western sky in vibrant strokes of crimson and gold, Elara sat beside Grandmother Willow watching the preparations for supper. The savory aromas of roasting game and gently simmering roots swirled in the air, a welcome departure from the stale bread and meager rations she had subsisted on. A girl, barely 7 summers old, her eyes bright with curiosity, approached Elara. She shyly offered a petite, intricately woven basket overflowing with dried cranberries. Elara accepted the gift with a genuine smile, her heart touched by the simple act of kindness. "Thank you," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "It's beautiful." The girl giggled, darting back to her mother, who smiled in Elara's direction and gave a small nod. Grandmother Willow gave a soft chuckle. "They are curious about you, child. They have not encountered one such as yourself." Elara glanced down at her pale complexion and unkempt hair, suddenly aware of the stark contrast she presented. "I must seem very foreign to them." "Different, indeed," Grandmother Willow conceded, "but not foreign. We see the hurt mirrored in your eyes, the ache nestled in your heart. We know that you have suffered greatly." Elara's throat constricted. She hadn't voiced the horrors she'd endured, unable to find the language to articulate them. Yet Grandmother Willow seemed to see into her very soul. Later that night, following the meal, as the women gathered around the flickering flames, Elara found herself drawn into their fold. They conversed in Lakota, their voices a soothing melody, yet they made a concerted effort to include her, gesturing to objects and repeating their names in her native tongue. Eventually, one of the women, a young mother with an infant secured to her back, beckoned Elara to speak. With hesitant steps, Elara began to recount her story, stumbling over the initial words, her voice barely audible. She spoke of her husband's untimely demise, the crushing isolation of the farm, Silas Blackwood's betrayal. As she shared her ordeal, the women listened intently, their countenances reflecting profound empathy. When she concluded, a heavy silence settled over the group. Then Grandmother Willow reached out, her hand encompassing Elara's in a warm, comforting gesture. "You are safe now, Elara Metasweet," she declared, her voice resonating with quiet strength. "You are one of us." Tears surged in Elara's eyes, tears of release, of thankfulness, of a profound sense of belonging that had eluded her grasp for so long. She was still a widow, still haunted by the specters of the past, but within this humble village, embraced by these benevolent souls, a fragile ember of hope began to glow within her heart. The subsequent days were spent learning at the women's sides. They instructed her in the art of preparing nourishing meals using native ingredients, the techniques of tanning animal hides, the intricacies of weaving baskets from river reeds. She absorbed knowledge of the healing properties of plants, the sacred importance of honoring the land, the potent strength derived from unity. One afternoon, while assisting in the gathering of firewood, Elara broached the subject of Swift Arrow with Grandmother Willow. "He saved my life," she confessed. "I owe him a debt beyond measure." Grandmother Willow smiled knowingly. "Swift Arrow possesses a generous heart, though it is burdened by sorrow. He lost both his wife and child to the illness carried by the white man." Elara's own heart ached in shared grief. She now understood the source of the profound melancholy she had observed in his gaze. "He recognizes your pain," Grandmother Willow added. "He understands the weight of suffering. That is why he extended his hand to you." As the days gave way to weeks, Elara felt a resurgence of vitality both in body and spirit. The wounds that had marked her wrists gradually faded into pale scars. Yet, the deeper injuries inflicted by Silas Blackwood on her very being slowly began to heal. She remained an outsider in this foreign landscape, but she was no longer bereft of companionship. She had found a haven, a kinship, amidst the Lakota people. And for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, she dared to entertain the prospect of a brighter future. Whispers of deceit. The root cellar's emptiness slammed into Silas Blackwood, a gut-wrenching vacuum. He'd expected Elara, a broken sparrow, nestled among the potatoes. Instead, only the clammy earth and the ghost of rot offered a greeting. A curse, low and feral, ripped from his throat, bouncing off the earthen walls. She was gone. Panic clawed at his composure, vying with incandescent fury. He'd reigned over her for so long, shaping her will with a glance, a cutting remark, a well-aimed threat. Now she dissolved a wisp of smoke on a harsh wind. He clawed his way back up the steps, his heavy boots drumming a frantic rhythm. The sun, a brazen eye in the sky, mocked his unraveling control. A scheme was needed. An admission of flight was unthinkable, a beacon to scrutiny and suspicion. He had to control the story, to mold her vanishing into a tool. He knew just how. He marched toward the scattering of dwellings that comprised the settlement, his face a rigid mask of injured innocence. He found Thomas Abernathy mending his cabin's roof. Thomas, a man permanently stooped beneath the weight of deference, offered a tentative smile. Silas. Didn't expect to see you. Beautiful day, isn't it? Silas brushed past the nicety. Have you seen Alara, Thomas? His tone oozed concern undercut with a tremble of controlled fear. Thomas blinked, his smile dying. Alara? Not today, Silas. Thought she was under the weather. Silas's gaze sharpened. Under the weather? She's been snatched, Thomas. Abducted. Thomas's hammer tumbled from his fingers, a jarring clang against the quiet. Abducted? By whom? Silas lowered his voice, drawing Thomas in as if sharing a terrible confidence. The Lakota. I spotted them myself, lurking near the tree line yesterday. I dismissed it, hoping they'd just move on. But now they've taken her. Thomas's face drained of color. He knew Silas had always been firm with Alara, but the specter of the Lakota carrying her off was chilling. Are you certain, Silas? Maybe she just strolled into the woods. Silas scoffed. A stroll? In her condition? Don't be dense, Thomas. They covet her. They always hunger for something. And now they possess her. He paused, letting the dread simmer. Who knows what depravities she'll suffer? We've all heard the tales. He let the sentence hang, allowing Thomas's imagination to paint the gruesome details. He unfurled a fabricated narrative, conjuring images of war-painted visages, plumed headdresses, and glinting spears. He spoke of nighttime rustlings, of disappearing livestock, of the encroaching menace the Lakota posed to their tranquil existence. He embellished, distorted, outright lied, weaving a tapestry of fear and paranoia. They'll return, Silas intoned, his voice a somber knell. They'll return for our wives, our children, our very soil. We must be vigilant, Thomas. We must safeguard ourselves. Thomas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple a frantic pulse in his throat. A pacifist by nature, a man of quiet faith and modest joys, he felt the chill of the image Silas had manufactured, fueled by years of ingrained bias and dread. What can we possibly do, Silas? Silas gripped his shoulder, his hold surprisingly strong. We must prepare. Hone our tools, reinforce our defenses. And we need to broadcast a message. A message of defiance, of resilience, of unwavering resolve. He continued his rounds, disseminating his venom like a fast-spreading disease. He lamented Alara's fragility, her delicate health, portraying her as a damsel imperiled, a defenseless innocent snatched from their haven. He amplified the latent resentment towards the Lakota, tapping into the primal fear and distrust that festered beneath the veneer of their fragile community. Thomas watched him depart, a knot of disquiet twisting in his gut. He yearned to believe Silas, he honestly did. He wanted to accept that Alara had been stolen away, that the Lakota represented a genuine threat. Yet something felt off-key. The wildness in Silas's eyes, the feverish pitch of his voice, it struck him as theatrical, overblown. He glanced toward the woods, a sprawling vista of green and shadow. He thought of Alara, a woman he scarcely knew, yet whose unspoken sorrow had always resonated with him. He recalled the bruises he'd occasionally noticed on her arms, the terror that had flickered in her gaze. A memory surfaced, unwelcome. A fleeting glimpse of Silas hauling Alara toward the root cellar, her expression a mask of silent anguish. He shook his head, attempting to dispel the thought. But it persisted, a nagging whisper in the recesses of his mind. What if Silas was fabricating the entire story? What if Alara hadn't been kidnapped? What if she had simply fled? And what if, in his frantic scramble to conceal his own actions, Silas was leading them all toward a perilous abyss? The weight of the hammer in his hand felt suddenly significant, an emblem of the violence Silas was so eagerly inciting. Thomas gazed at his weathered hands, the hands of a craftsman, a farmer, a man of peace. He realized he couldn't stand idly by while Silas incited hatred and bloodshed on a foundation of falsehoods. He wasn't certain of the course of action, but he knew inaction was not an option. The seeds of deceit had been sown, but perhaps, just perhaps, he could still uproot them. Truth and courage. A palpable tension hung in the settlement, a consequence of Silas's insidious campaign of suspicion. Perched atop the rickety platform, chest thrust forward, he bellowed about brutal incursions and the abduction of our cherished Alara. Yet, the villagers below weren't entirely buying it. Thomas noticed, the hesitant glance in Martha's expression, Caleb's uneasy shifting, their skepticism evident. Here was an opening, a fragile opportunity he had to exploit. Before he could speak, a new figure commanded the clearing. Swift Arrow. He entered astride a painted horse, Alara secure behind him, arms encircling his waist. The steed moved like a phantom, and Swift Arrow's countenance, as if sculpted from granite, revealed nothing. He halted before Silas's stage, the silence stretching, tight as a drawn cord. Silas's features twisted with fury. What's the meaning of this? You dare return her, parading your transgression. Swift Arrow dismounted, then gently assisted Alara. He stood firm, his gaze unflinching. He addressed the crowd in Lakota, a tongue unknown to most, yet his intonation was clear, a challenge, a denunciation. Thomas felt a stirring within him, not quite hope, but something akin to it. Silas spluttered, agitated. What did he say? Someone interpret. He's confessing his guilt, I tell you. Alara moved forward, her head held high. He's not confessing anything, Silas. He's asking why you spread falsehoods. A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. Alara, always so reserved, so agreeable, defying Silas? Alara, stay away from him. He's cast a spell on you. Silas's voice grated, a frantic edge exposing the cracks in his fabricated persona. No one has bewitched me, Silas, Alara declared, her voice ringing with newfound strength. But I have finally seen things as they are. She scanned the faces before her, her gaze briefly connecting with Thomas's, offering a flicker of reassurance. I left Silas's home of my own free will. I was not treated kindly there. The stillness was punctuated only by the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Martha gasped, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. Caleb lowered his head, gripped by remorse. Silas's eyes darted frantically, seeking support, meeting only with suspicion. She's lying. He's feeding her lies. She was kidnapped, threatened. Swift Arrow closed the distance between them, a bulwark of protection. He remained silent, yet his eyes held a profound understanding that rendered Silas speechless more effectively than any shouted accusation. He didn't threaten me, Alara said, her voice wavering almost imperceptibly. He rescued me. He showed me compassion when I received none. She drew a deep breath. Silas kept me confined in the root cellar. He claimed it was for my own protection, but her voice faltered. It wasn't. A murmur began, a low hum that quickly amplified. Doubts, long buried, now surfaced unrestrained. They recalled fleeting glimpses of bruises, the way Alara recoiled from Silas's touch. They remembered his volatile temper, his controlling nature. Lies. Utter fabrications. Silas bellowed, his face flushed crimson. He launched himself from the platform, nearly falling in his haste. He surged toward Alara, his hand extended in a threatening gesture. With blinding speed, Swift Arrow intervened, stepping between Silas and Alara. His hand hovered near the hilt of his knife, a stark warning. Lay a hand on her, Swift Arrow intoned, his voice a dangerous undertone, and you will answer to me. Though the Lakota words remained unintelligible to most, the meaning resonated with absolute clarity. Silas stopped dead, his hand trembling midair. He beheld the unyielding determination in Swift Arrow's eyes, the burgeoning support coalescing around Alara. He saw the uncertainty, the mistrust etched on the faces of his community. He had lost his grip. His shoulders slumped, his facade of authority collapsing. She's turned you all against me, he rasped, his voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. Thomas strode forward, emboldened by Alara's bravery. We're not against you, Silas. We simply seek the truth. He glanced at the assembled villagers, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock and realization. All of us. A bridge of hope. The silence after Alara's declaration was a tangible thing, a heavy shroud woven from disbelief and dawning understanding. Silas, his face a shifting mosaic of rage and dread, stammered, She's gone mad. The heathens have corrupted her mind. Swift Arrow advanced, his gaze, dark and unwavering, pinned on Silas. He spoke in Lakota, the words clipped and resonant. Thomas Abernathy, fueled by Alara's courage and the blatant lies pouring from Silas's mouth, discovered his resolve. Enough, Silas. We've all witnessed your dealings. Your constant machinations. He scanned the villagers, their faces mirroring concern and a growing sense of betrayal. It's time for the unvarnished truth. The truth, as Alara unveiled it, stood in stark opposition to the carefully spun tale Silas had presented. She recounted his cruelty, his subtle manipulations, the trumped-up charges of theft, and her resulting unjust confinement. She spoke then of the kindness she'd found among the Lakota, the solace she received, and the respect afforded to her. With each revelation, Silas's composure cracked, his carefully constructed facade of righteousness crumbling like sun-baked clay. One by one, the villagers turned their backs on Silas, the weight of their collective disappointment almost a physical presence. Even those who had prospered under his sway now saw him for who he was, a fraud, a tyrant, a deceiver. Silas, sensing the collapse of his dominion, attempted a last-ditch maneuver. You'll regret this. The Lakota are savages. They'll butcher us in our beds. Swift Arrow remained unmoved. He merely raised a hand and two Lakota warriors stepped forward, their presence a silent, compelling assurance to the villagers. Thomas, now acting as a makeshift leader, addressed Silas. You will atone for your wrongs, Silas. You will restore what you stole, and you will depart this village. We no longer welcome you. The following days were a flurry of activity. Silas, stripped of his authority and influence, was forced to return the ill-gotten gains. Then he was banished from the village, his departure an unseen, humiliating exit. Ilara, meanwhile, stood at a crossroads. She could return to the village, to the life she had previously known, or she could embrace the uncharted territory now before her. She sought guidance from Grandmother Willow, the Lakota elder whose wisdom and compassion had soothed her wounded spirit. The Great Spirit has guided you here, Ilara, Grandmother Willow declared, her voice a gentle anchor. You have much to offer my people, and they, in turn, have much to offer you. The choice is yours, but know you are welcome, always. Ilara considered Swift Arrow, his quiet strength and unwavering devotion. She contemplated the Lakota way of life, its profound connection to the earth and its reverence for all living creatures. She recalled the serenity she had found, a tranquility previously unknown to her. Her decision solidified. I will stay, she confirmed to Grandmother Willow. I will learn your ways, and I will help forge a bond between our peoples. And so Ilara embarked on her new life among the Lakota. She absorbed their language, their customs, their practices. She worked alongside Swift Arrow, planting crops, gathering herbs, and instructing the children in English. She was no longer the poor widow, but a woman reborn, resilient and purposeful, with belonging and direction. Swift Arrow reciprocally began to learn of the settlers' habits. He comprehended their anxieties and their skepticism, but he also recognized their potential for benevolence. He collaborated with Ilara to demonstrate that the Lakota were not barbarians, but a people with their own heritage, their own principles, and their own yearning for amity. Together, Ilara and Swift Arrow began to erect that bridge. They organized gatherings where Lakota and settlers shared meals, histories, and skills. They acted as interpreters, clarifying traditions and beliefs. They revealed that, despite superficial differences, they held much in common: a love of this land, a desire for a brighter tomorrow, and a willingness to collaborate toward its achievement. As winter's grip weakened, the first signals of spring surfaced. The snow receded, revealing the fertile earth. The trees began to unfurl their leaves, and the birds returned, their joyous melodies filling the air. The river, once a frozen expanse, resumed its course, carrying the promise of renewal and fresh starts. One evening, Ilara and Swift Arrow stood together on a slight elevation overlooking the valley. The sunset splashed the sky with hues of coral, rose, and amethyst. A soft breeze whispered through the prairie grasses, carrying the fragrance of pine and damp soil. It is breathtaking, Ilara said, her voice infused with wonder. Swift Arrow nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The Great Spirit favors us, he affirmed. The bridge stands. Now we must traverse it together. As they stood there, hand in hand, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, they knew that the path ahead would not be without its hurdles. There would be challenges and setbacks, misunderstandings and disagreements. But they also understood that they were not isolated in this endeavor. They had each other, they had their communities, and they possessed the unwavering conviction that, together, they could cultivate a future where two cultures could coexist peacefully, side by side. The spring thaw wasn't simply a change in season, it was a loosening of hardened hearts, a pledge of a harmonious future.